We should put it in the chat, Jan, so everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yep. Well, we'll make that announcement.
Yeah, tonight. And I'll send a summary.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll go. Welcome. We're up to 39 people. Becky, we're thrilled to have you here. We're going to do a little bit of introductions. Bev Copeland is going to get us started by reading a land acknowledgement statement that is very appropriate. And then we'll introduce Jan Schwartz, who will introduce you, Becky. So that's our order for tonight.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I see we have a celebrity with us tonight, author Sarah Paretsky. So that's pretty exciting. Welcome, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks to Beth for inviting me.
The land acknowledgement statement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. We hope our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations. The most prominent Native tribes in Illinois were the Illinois, the Miami, the Winnebago, Sauk, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes. The land that surrounds us is part of who we are. It reflects our history. The land that surrounds us is part of who we, I'm sorry, I read that already. We need to protect and honor the history and the people of these places. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Yeah, it's amazing how much land we're actually on. It really emphasizes that. And I'd now like to introduce Jan Schwartz, who most of you do know. When we were talking about the topic and decided to have Indigenous people, Native Americans, Jan said, oh, she knows people. So I'm going to introduce Jan, who will explain this very wonderfully complicated story that we're all just 6 degrees apart.
Well, we're honored to have Dr. Rebecca Crawford Foster tonight to be our speaker. Becky is a proud member of the Blackfeet Dakota tribes. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Kathy Conlon, which is what Beth was talking about, who is a dear friend and colleague, who introduced me to her sister-in-law, Becky, to make tonight possible. Becky is not only incredibly accomplished, she is dedicated to making life better and has done so in many ways with her deep, down-to-earth humanity, insight, and knowledge. She is a clinical psychologist, professor, and consultant who has worked closely with Native American communities in South Dakota and Montana for over 35 years. If you watch Frontline's Predator on the Reservation, you may recognize her and her husband, Dan. They spoke of the horrendous abuse that one doctor was able to perpetrate against young boys for 20 years, going from one reservation to the next, until he was finally stopped and imprisoned. The challenges faced by systematic racism plagues the Native American community and is often unseen by the outside. Becky and her husband have been constant agents of health and positive change to those they work with. Besides her professional life, she is also the mother of 14 children, a handful of whom are still at home. She has a compelling story to tell and one that has been invisible to most Americans. So I am thrilled to say hello, Becky, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm really honored to address you. As you said, my sister-in-law, Kathleen, mentioned this and said, "Oh, I think you would be wonderful to do this." And then I sat and talked with Jan, and I said, I think I would. I think I would this would be an honor. As she said, I'm Blackfeet, I'm Umscapacunny and Dakota from Montana. I currently live outside of Missoula there's 12 of us now in the home. And we recently brought in our niece, who is 12. And our youngest is our niece, 12, and our 13-year-old twins. And so my husband and I worked for many years on the Blackfeet Reservation, on my reservation, which is up next to Glacier Park, if any of you have ever been there. And then my grandfather is Dakota from Fort Peck, and his family was part of Sitting Bull's band that went up into Canada. So that's part of my history. But before we start, it's our tradition to start with a blessing. So it brings us all together. And so I would like to start and sing Women's Song, which is given to us as part of our Sundance ceremony and sort of part of our women's society. And so it talks about all the grandmothers and all the mothers and all those that have gone before and all those that are to come and be with us tonight and to bless us as we gather together. So. Tunkana mahuelo he mitakuyelo wanita chale chamuelo he tunkaunchi mala welo he tunkana mahuelo he mitakuyelo wanita chale chamuelo he tunkauchi mara welo he. Oh, mitakias. Okay, thank you. One of the things that I think we should talk a little bit about is our history. And I don't know how everyone is well versed in Native history, but right now there are 574 Native tribes across the United States. Those are federally recognized tribes. And so that are acknowledged by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We'll get to that in a second. But we're only about 2% of the population. So we're a small population, and I had to laugh, but I also felt kind of sad because during the election, they were talking about all the groups and posting, all the groups and how people were voting and stuff, and we weren't listed. We were in the category of other, so we weren't even big enough to be acknowledged. And when you're invisible, then you can be forgotten. And so sometimes we feel like we're the forgotten people. And so we have to speak louder in order to make our voices heard and our needs heard. We're a unique group in the United States because there are a number of us that are on reservations. And the reservation system was established in 1851. And most of all of the tribes, if you were to talk to them, I'm sure have a story, a tragic story of how they came to be placed on the reservation. And for the Blackfeet, our story was, we were all brought into an area on the Blackfeet reservation and held over the winter, and they called it Starvation Winter. And we lost 3/4 of our tribe because they just starved. And then we have our every tribe ends up having a story of a massacre or deaths, and ours was the Bear Creek Massacre. Bear River Massacre. And my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who was only 9 years old, was a survivor of that. And the Army came in looking for another band of the Blackfeet, and they saw our band. And it was, the feeling of Indians are Indians. So they attacked them, and it was in the middle of January. And most of the men were out hunting. And so it was just old people and children that were left. And so, and very few of them survived. And my great-grandmother would tell my dad about that. And it wasn't that long ago. And that's what I don't think people realize, is it was not that long ago. So, you know, we've heard people tell us and tell our children, oh, that was a long time ago, you know, you guys should be over it. But we're not over it, because I remember, and I know those people, my grandparents were, talked about it as I was growing up. It wasn't until 1924, when people were on reservations, that they couldn't leave. You couldn't leave the reservation unless you got a pass from the superintendent. And so it was our home, but we were kept there, okay? And when they put us on the reservation, the one thing that sets us apart from all other groups in the United States is that in order to be identified as part of a tribe, you are enrolled. And we're the only group in the United States, I think, that we have cards and we have numbers, and they're government numbers. And it's not a social security number, and it's not a driver's license number. It's your tribal ID number. And it's a card, and it identifies down to the 72nd how much Native blood you have. And each tribe establishes their own enrollment criteria. So for the Blackfeet, you have to be a quarter Blackfeet in order to be enrolled. For the Northern Cheyenne, it's three-fourths. So each tribe sets their own tribal enrollment. And so that's an issue that we have. And then the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who was put in charge of our land, even though they allotted our land to us. And so after the reservation was established, they divided it up into allotments. And every person got an allotment. And that was back in my grandmother's, when my grandmother was young. And, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is a federal agency, controls that land and controls that access. So even though it's your land, if you wanted to build a house on it, you have to get permission to do that. If you wanted to sell it, you have to get permission from the federal government in order to do that. So we have a unique relationship with the federal government that isn't, it isn't in our best interest, I can tell you that, okay. And then we come to our children, okay, who are our most precious things in our world. And the Carlisle Indian School was established in 1879. And there were boarding schools that were set up all over the United States. And what they would do is, my grandfather was telling me, and my grandmother on my father's side, she was 8 years old when the tribal police came and took her from her home. So you can imagine being in the end of September, beginning October, having the tribal police come and take your children. And you didn't know where they went and where they were going or what was going to happen to them, but they were going someplace. So my grandmother, who was 8, was sent from Montana to Pennsylvania. And she came back when she was 18. My grandfather, he tells a story about how he was being raised by he calls them his grandparents, but I'm not sure that's if they were his blood relatives or not. But anyway, they had a bunch of kids that they were raising. And the police came, and he ran into the cabin, and he hid under the bed, and he laughs and he said, well, I was just stupid because I hid under the bed and the tribal police came in and they just whipped a buggy whip underneath the bed. And when I scrambled out, they took me and sent him to Nebraska, I think, where he went. And these kids that were taken, they came back when they were 18, but how it affects us now is that when my grandmother, on my father's side, they had 14 kids. There were 14 kids in their family. Not all of them survived to adulthood, but 8 of them did. And what she did was she taught the oldest 4 to speak Blackfeet. And it's a really difficult, it's a really difficult language. And so all of our kids have Dakota names because they're easier. But she's taught the first 4 to speak Blackfeet, and the last 4 she didn't. She prohibited them. And she said because in her view, 4 of them would make it. 4 of them would be successful. And somebody asked a question about the tribal police. The tribal police were Native police. They were not white, they were Native police, okay? When she went to the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, it was run by Richard Pratt, who was a general in the Union Army. And his motto was to kill the Indian and save the man. So kill the Indian and save the child was his motto, and that's what they aspired to do. What ended up happening is we ended up with intergenerational trauma and a loss of language, culture, identity, because they were prohibited from speaking their language, from practicing culture. And imagine an 8-year-old child, that had to be incredibly confusing and scary. During those years, if you think about it, and as you're growing and you're a female, those are those years that you learn how to become a mother, how to carry on and pass on different cultural traditions as far as raising a family. And she wasn't provided with those. And so it made it extremely difficult for my father and his siblings, because and abuse was rampant. So he talks about his mother being extremely unhappy, and her talking about all the abuse and stuff that she went through when she was there. Native people were not even made citizens in the United States until 1924. And so even though this is our land and this is our country, we weren't even made citizens until 1924. And up until 1934, the government could come in and seize Native land. So we had no say into what happened with our land. They could just come in and take it. In 1968, we had the Indian Civil Rights Act, finally, 1968, it wasn't that long ago, that we were able to have civil rights like everyone else in the United States. The one that strikes me as being exceptionally important was in 1978. We had our Indian Freedom of Religion Act that was finally brought into effect, which protects Native people and allows us to be able to practice our ceremony, to practice our traditions, to speak our language, and to have possessions of our sacred ceremonial objects. And that's incredibly important because of the fact that I know our family and my husband participates in the Sundance ceremony in South Dakota and has been a Sundancer for about 34 years. And I've danced there many years too in Sisseton and stuff. But up until that point, you could not have your sacred pipes. It was illegal to have those. It was illegal to pray. Up until before that, if someone was found praying and they had their pipe could be taken and they could be put in jail. Our Sundance ceremonies, it was illegal. And so when my husband was dancing, my grandmother was alive, and she was in her 80s when she was alive. And we brought her down to the Sundance ceremony in South Dakota, and she just sat and she was watching them. And our younger daughter was participating in this ceremony too. And she just sat, she just cried. And she said, the last time I went to a ceremony was when I was 13. And she said, we rode horseback and wagons. And she said, and we traveled across the state of Montana. And she said, it was amazing. She said, we came up over the hill and there were people that were coming from all over. She said, I don't know how they knew where to go and what was happening, but they came. And she said, and they had the Sundance, and it's our new year, and it's our where we pray and we give thanks, and we for everyone. And she said at the end of those days, she said, then everybody just left. They just disappeared. And she said, that was the last time. And so she just sat and cried. She said, I never, ever thought I would see this again. And so I was so happy for her to be able to be there and to be able to have that chance to participate in that ceremony that was so near and dear to all of us. And they talk about our children. We do have a lot of children. And what happened was, up until the 70s, our children were removed at a high rate and placed in non-Indian homes. So we found that up until the 70s, late 70s, 25 to 35% of all of our Native children were being removed and placed in non-Native homes. And they were being adopted out at a high rate. So we couldn't protect our children. And so in the 70s, let's see, I have that date here. No, I have it. In the 70s, they had the, in 1978, they had the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was to try and protect our children. And what happened was, if a child is born and identified as a Native child now, from then till now, and they're born, and our children, one of our sons was born in Albuquerque, and one of our daughters was born in Seattle, another one was born in Oregon, and they called the tribe, they can identify the tribe of origin of the mother. They called the tribe and they asked the tribe, they say, we have an infant here that is going to be placed, and we're asking if you want to intervene and bring this child back to be placed with a family member or a member of the tribe. And if they can't find anybody, they can go outside the tribe and place with other Native people. And so we literally would get calls I would get messages on my phone and at work, and they would say, this is what they say to you, we have an infant and you're related to them, will you take them? And that's pretty much all the information that they give you. And I'd say, well, you have to narrow it down because I'm related to 2 reservations and that's thousands of people. So you got to give me a little bit more information. And they'd say, well, it's a girl or it's a boy, or something. And so we ended up with 7 of our relatives that we brought into our home because of the fact that I just could not see losing our children. I just couldn't. And now that they're in our home, we're able to tell them how we're related, who they're related to, and we have open adoptions, so they know who their birth mother is, and we say, you can be mad at me. I get fired as a mom almost every day. You can be mad at me, but I'm still your family. I'm your blood family. And along with that, what happens is we've named every one of our children Dakota names. And so when they got their names, they were named through a ceremonial process. And so each one of their names has a specific meaning. And so we had our son, Mato Hota Hokshina, Grizzly Bear Boy. Before he was born, we were in ceremony and the guy that was running the ceremony said, you are going to be having a baby come to you. And it's a boy. And you'll name him Grizzly Bear Boy. And that's how Mato came to be with us. They called us a couple of weeks later and told us of his birth. So each one of the kids has stories like that. And along with those stories comes ceremonial songs and prayers. And now we have a sweat lodge on our property, which would never have happened before 1962. So our kids are learning those songs and they're learning how to run different ceremonies, which I think is incredibly important. For the girls, what happens for the girls is as they're in our home, I'm able to explain to them what it's like and what responsibilities they have as a young woman and what they can and can't do. and why it's so important to think well of themselves and to take care of themselves, because they're the life givers. If we don't have them, our nations die, you know, and stuff. So we have, those are some of the things that when we talk about history, it's incredibly important, I think, for those people that aren't familiar with Native history to have a background in, because that's where we operate from. And we don't forget that. You know, we just truly do not forget that. And so working at Browning, working with my own people, when we had the issue with the pediatrician that was there, my husband worked in the Bureau of Prisons for 20 some years. And he just knew that something was wrong. And so when we reported this, our health system on the reservations, with a number of treaties, we were guaranteed as payment for our land was to have education and healthcare. That was part of that was written in a number of the treaties. So we have Indian Health Service, which is extremely underfunded. And you know, they do the best they can with what they have. But that's what the Native people have on each reservation is a Indian Health Service hospital. As far as education, you know, there's this misconception that all Native people get education free, and we don't. You know, you have scholarships, and you can apply for a small scholarship through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and if you get it, you're lucky. If you don't, you're just on your own. The same thing with our healthcare. We have a number of people. Our diabetes rate is through the roof. We have a number of people who are dependent on the Indian Health Service for their healthcare, and if there's no money to provide for outside surgeries or extra care, they don't get it. They just don't. And we get forgotten. You know, when we were at Rosebud, would have the senators from South Dakota and stuff that would come and visit the hospitals and stuff. And, but we never did get an increase in funding. We just made do with what we had. And so that's something that we struggle with all the time. And when we talk about current issues, you know, we were talking about even the land issue, and I'm sure all of you had heard about the Keystone Pipeline, which was a major issue. And LaDonna Allard, that was her land that all of that happened on. When they had those camps and they were having that, when they were protesting that was her land. It was private land. It wasn't the state of South Dakota's land. That was her allotted land. And so that they were camped on, that they were protesting. And I was telling Jan and Beth and the other ladies that back when I was at University of North Dakota teaching, I went up to Devil's Lake, well, they call it Spirit Lake now, I guess. And I was getting my Indian name, which is Wambli Howashtewan, Good Voice Eagle Woman. And it was in that at end of June. It was hot. Oh my gosh, it was so hot. And the person who was holding the Inipi, who was holding this naming ceremony, the sweat in the naming center, was a really good friend of my father's. And so we got there and we went in, and it was so hot. And LaDonna was there also. She was the other one. And I swear, I thought, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I'm dying in here. And they would open up the door of the sweat lodge, and here were all of these old people, which I guess I am now, but they were like in their 70s and 80s, and they were just sitting up, you know. It was like right before the door would open, I'd sit up, you know, so I didn't want to look too weak and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, how do they do this? How do they? These are such tough people. And we got our names, and LaDonna's name was Good Earth Mother, I think was her name. And I thought how appropriate that all those years later, that she's the one that's fighting for clean water. And she's the one that's fighting for the protection of the earth. You know, all those years later that she's doing that. And I just use my voice, I guess, and stuff. And so, and that was in ceremony. I thought, how did they know that? How did they know that? How could they see that far ahead to know that that was what her mission in life was, to protect the land and protect the water? Our Native people now, the women are over two times more likely to be sexually assaulted than any other group in the United States. Our suicide rate is extremely high. It's the second leading cause of death for those between the ages of 10 and 34. And it's the leading cause of death for Native girls between 10 and 14. And so, and on some reservations, our poverty is unbelievable. On some reservations, the unemployment rate, it runs 85%. And I thought I knew poverty growing up on the Blackfeet Reservation. I thought I knew poverty, and I didn't. When I went through Pine Ridge, which I think is the poorest reservation in the United States, and Rosebud, I didn't understand poverty at all. And it was a very humbling and eye-opening experience, and an honor for me to be able to work for almost 13 years down at Rosebud. And we ended up at Rosebud after that, the issue with the pediatrician. So we needed a place to land. And so we ended up being at Rosebud. The psychologists and Native psychologists were a very small group. And we all know each other, or if we don't know each other, we know somebody who knows, who knows us or something. We're a very small group. And so we started calling around because we needed to move quickly. And a friend of ours was working at Rosebud, and he said, come down here, we need you, come down here. And so we ended up being there for about 13 years, working with mental health and dealing with suicide, and dealing with our meth use now is just skyrocketing. And I still do telemental health with the Rosebud methamphetamine treatment program currently. And so we still try and help wherever we can. But I have to tell you about a case about the Ncjw welfare. So last Friday, my husband, who is supposed to be on this call, by the way, was testifying. The Rosebud Sioux tribe called him and said, would you please help us with an ICWA case? We have 2 young children that they're trying to adopt out to a non-Native family, and the family on the reservation want them back. And so we really need you to help. We really need you to help us. And so he testified for them, and he found out today that they're going to be placed back with their Native family, which I'm just so happy for. I am so happy for. There's a feeling that when our children are placed out of our home and away from Native families, even our niece who we brought home, I was talking with the caseworker, and I said, what always amazed me is, I said, how many Native families there are out there that are healthy Native families. They're good homes. And I said, and she said, we have a hard time finding them. And I said, I don't think you look very well. I think you look hard enough. Because I said it's almost this misconception, this belief that they're doing our children a favor to be able to place them off the reservation and out of Native homes and stuff. And so I was talking with our kids as they've grown up, we were talking with them, and our daughter said, Mom, She said, what would have happened to me if you guys wouldn't have brought me home? She said, how would I have known where I came from? How would I have been able to learn all the things that I need to about being, a Dakota woman? She said, how would I have known that? She said, I would have been so lost. She said, look at my skin. My skin is brown. How would I have come to terms with not knowing where I came from? And so I think that's extremely important, that those are issues that we deal with all the time. And there are cases that we've lost, where we've lost our children, and that's extremely sad for me. Another gigantic issue, I feel like I'm talking really fast. Another gigantic issue that we're dealing with is the missing and murdered Indigenous women across the United States. And right now, the Indian women, the murder rate is 10 times the national average for Native women. And they talk about every week, I'm not exaggerating, every week on Facebook, there's a post of another Native woman that's gone missing. And we're invisible. Our women, our population is invisible. And so we felt like we were fighting that battle alone. And our Senate, one of our senators, John Tester from Montana, took up that fight. And so he's trying to help us as much as we can to help bring light to that issue. And so right now, and they just did a sample across 71 urban cities, and they found 506 murdered and missing Indigenous women that just across 71 cities. 280 of them were found dead. The median age for the missing women is 29 years old. Although what's really scary for me is that a number of the posts and stuff that I see are teenagers that are like 14, 15, 16 years old that went out for a walk and then they can't find them. Here in Missoula, a young woman just walked out of a store and was never seen again. So I keep telling my kids, you have to be careful. You have to be vigilant. And our twins, who, and everybody thinks their kids are gorgeous, which they are, but these 13-year-old twins are drop dead gorgeous. But anyway, and so I keep telling them, not everyone is your friend. Not everyone is your friend. You have to be careful. You have to, look at people in a different way. I said, because you're only 90 pounds. And I know that because they just weighed themselves. Because they're going to start wrestling again. And I said, you're only 90 pounds. I said, soaking wet, somebody could just come by and grab you and we would never see you again, And so they're like, I know, Mom, I know. But those are some of the issues that we're dealing that are active in Indian country right now. And then we go back to suicide, we go back to depression, we go back to our meth use, our alcohol use. And I see those as primarily issues that stem from poverty. Our housing is just unbelievable. When we were in Rosebud, we had the biggest house on the Indian Health Service compound. And I think we had 4 bedrooms. And it wasn't unusual to have, 20 people there. And we took care of a lot of teenagers because their families didn't have food. And we worked, both of us had good jobs and stuff. And so we just took care of additional kids because that was what you did. You just shared what you have. And I like to say that's improved because there's 12 of us here. I just make big pots of everything. And Kathleen's fed us a lot, so she knows what it's like to feed our group and stuff. But we try and and keep our families together and keep our families positive. So in addition to all the difficult things that you hear about Native people with that we're having, I think we have a lot of strengths and a lot of positive things too, which sometimes get lost. And a lot of that goes back to culture. It goes back to language. It goes back to our ceremonies. It goes back to our songs. It goes back to our worldview and our resiliency. And so, you know, you always look for a reason to keep going. And a number of that is we have a concept, which is a we concept. It's not an I, it's a we. And so it's okay, you know, when I was going through my graduate program, I had my two older girls with me, and we would talk about why, you know, we were even doing what we were doing, you know, and the girls would say, geez, Mom, this is so hard, you know, you're working so hard, we're poor, you know, I'm graduate students, everybody knows that, you're always poor. And to this day, neither one of them like rice because we ate so much of it. And they said, you know, we're just always struggling. And I said, I know, I said, but we have to do this. It was a we have to do this. You girls and I, we have to do this. And they said, why? And I said, because our people need us. Our people need us. So I said, it's not just me. I said, one of the reasons I'm doing this is I said, because our people have to survive. And in order to survive, I said, we have to learn how to walk in two worlds. And we have to do that. We have to do it successfully. And so as I was leaving for college, I was packing my little car and my grandfather came out. And I said, geez, Grandpa, I said, you know, Grandma and Mom and Dad don't want me to leave. You know, they said, if you leave, you're just going to be changed and it's not going to be the same. And he said, I know you will. And I said, I was kind of surprised by that. And he said, you know, in the old days, he said, we used to have societies. He said, societies protected our people. And every society had a job. And he said, there was the society that policed the camp. And they had knives and they had bow and arrows, and they had guns and they had clubs in order to protect the people. And he said, we don't have that now. He said, what we have is education. And he said, there are people on this reservation. And he said, and you know, the number of them are your relatives. He said, who could never live off the reservation. They just couldn't. And he said, and their job is to keep the language, the traditions, the ceremonies alive. That's their job. He said, and we have to make sure that we protect them. And so I said, okay. And he said, the only way that we're going to do that is to be able to walk in both worlds and have a weapon. And our weapon is education. So we're sending you young people out to get that education. And you're the one that's you're the ones that are going to be the modern warriors that stand between us. And he said, and the dominant society who will still try to take what little we have left. And so I said, okay. And essentially he was right. So we've learned to operate in those, those worlds. And it's incredibly important. And people, somebody asked about Wilma Mankiller. My husband knew her because he's Cherokee. An amazing, amazing lady. And so we have, throughout our tribes, we have amazingly strong women and leaders, and our men too. I tell each one of my kids that we have to, you have to stand strong and be proud of who you are, and to be humble, and to be willing to learn your cultural ways, to learn your language, because those are the things when life is really difficult. Those are the things that are going to help you survive. Because when you're alone and you're afraid, or you don't think you can be successful, then you start singing your songs inside. You go back to the basics, and you go back to your culture and tradition, and that will get you through every time. And so I think we're kind of at the question part, are we?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't see
I'm
many
trying to talk fast.
A number of them, Bev Copeland said, can you talk about Wilma Mankiller? A number of people, when they were talking about registering to me, said, what about the children in the documentary? Did any of them stay out of prison? What other things can you do? We do.
It was interesting. It was interesting because when I say we, my husband was on there. It's a royal we. He said, Becky, we're not connected. And I said, after 30 years, yeah, we're connected. And he, we kept speaking up and kept speaking up. And so 24 years later, I get a call at my office because it cracks me up. We're married and we worked in the same behavioral health office, and our offices ended up right next to each other. And so I get a call, and it was from an FBI agent. And he said, asked me if I knew Patrick Weber. And I said, yeah, I know him. And he said, what do you know about him? So I talked about Browning and about the sexual abuse of the boys and what we suspected and stuff, and how Dan reported it. And then they just moved him to Pine Ridge. I mean, that's even more isolated than Browning. And I didn't think there was a place more isolated than Browning, but that's more isolated. And I said, yeah, I know. And he goes, do you know? And he named the boy on the video. And I said, yeah, I know him. And he said, how do you know him? And I said, well, and he said, well, he said you were his therapist and he gave me permission to talk to you. And I said, well, I thought he was dead. And he said, no, he's in prison. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, the reason he remembers you and your husband is he said you two were the only two that believed him and the only two that tried to help him. And I felt, I was just crushed. I said, I wished we could have done more, but we had people within the agency that we worked that were not willing to believe that this could possibly happen. And so, we just kept talking. We just kept speaking out, whenever we had the opportunity to do that. And continue to do that to this day and stuff. But I'm not sure what more we could have done.
Yeah, this is.
Because, we always think of ourselves as the canaries in the mine, and when the canaries stop chirping, then everybody's in trouble. So when the native people stop chirping and we disappear, then we're all in trouble. But we just kept going. We just kept speaking out. But I will tell you this, I never leave any of my kids alone in a doctor's office.
Yeah.
Even though I worked in the hospital, I just never do it. And they're like, can you go? And my kids are like, no, if you have something to ask me, then you can ask my mom. She's right here. She can ask me.
Right.
We live, somebody asked about our children. We moved here outside of Missoula because I did my undergraduate in Missoula and I liked the Missoula area. So when we left Rosebud, we chose this area because some of our kids have special needs and we wanted them to have access to, different services. And so we we chose this area. And they go to a little school up here. I'm sorry, I'm beeping here. We go to a little school. They go to a little school up the road. And when Trump came into office, what we saw is in Montana, you don't have a lot of other minority groups, and the Black people are not, you don't have a lot of them in Montana. And so the natives are the group that people target. And so what the kids were, we have kids that are all sizes, shapes, and colors. And the kids were starting to have the kids at school make remarks to them. And so they got ready to go back to, potentially go back to school this year. And they started getting emails and Facebook posts and Instagram and Snapchat and all that other stuff that the kids get on of, you better not come back to school here. If you come back to school here, we're going to beat you up. And, you know, you guys are just, we don't want you here because you guys are just prairie niggers and, you know, you're black lips and you're just all, and so the kids were terrified. And they'd never heard those terms before, you know, and so Dan and I had to sit down and have long talks with them. And I told our older son, who's at the university, who's obviously Native. He has long, beautiful hair that he wears in braids and wears his shell earrings and everything. And I told him, Mato, please don't go anywhere in Missoula by yourself. Because we had a number of Native kids, Native young men who were attacked and beaten up. As they were going, one guy was going in to get coffee and bagels and he was attacked. And I said, please don't go anywhere because it's not safe. And so our kids are still at home now online. And we've just sat and had to have really open, candid talks. And that really hurt me, because I thought that naively, I guess, that we were kind of past that, and we're not. You know, we just saw the blatant racism and stuff get worse through the 4 years. So I'm glad that that Biden is here. I am, to bring some, I think, civility and common sense back. You know, that you don't hate somebody just because of the color of their skin. And I have to tell you, just a little thing. When my older girls, who, by the way, are both got their doctorates, so I made them, they were both successful. One's a psychologist, the other one's a molecular biologist in Sweden. But so we have a Ncjw, we have a red-haired Swedish granddaughter in Stockholm. But they were here for Christmas a couple of years ago. And I had 24 people here with my kids. I was in heaven. And we were talking, and Wambadiwi, our Eagle woman, Wambadiwi, she was saying, Mom, she said, did you know Grandpa used to make us go hide in the loft when somebody came? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And she goes, oh, I thought you knew. And I said, no. Well, how would I know? You never said anything. And she said, no, he made us go. Somebody would come and knock on the door and he'd say, you angels, run upstairs. You run upstairs and you hide and you don't come out until I come get you and stuff. So, and be quiet. And so they would go upstairs and they would hide, and then he would come up and get them. And I said, well, who came to the door? And she said, oh, it was the priest, you know, it was the priest. It was never anybody bad. And it wasn't never the police or anything. She said it was usually just the priest or a relative. But I was talking to her and I was like, geez. And she said, yeah. She said, I asked him one time, hey, Papa, how come you make us go and hide? And he said, so no one will take you. And I thought how horrible it must have been for him, you know, to be taken. And so we keep all of those stories, good and bad, and sad and happy, alive for our children, because I said, you never forget, you never want to forget those that have gone before you and all the sacrifices and everything that they've made so that you could be here, you know, so that when they sing, I said, when you guys sing your songs, when you sing your songs and you go into ceremony, I said, you know, your grandparents would be so happy to hear you, to know that that's going to continue. So I have a 1-year-old grandson. Well, he'll be 2, I guess. 1.5-year-old grandson who we're teaching songs to. So he listens and he drums with his hands. So I told my daughter, I said, when he gets to be older, he'll automatically sing these songs, and he won't know where to learn them. He just will know that he knows them. And I said, and it'll bring peace to his heart and his spirit. And I said, and that's what we want to do in order to keep going. So the majority of Native people have that strength, they have that resilience, and they have that joy and that beauty to be able to keep going. And so those are the positive things, that in spite of everything that we're dealing with, we can still laugh and be happy and be joyful and be thankful for those that went before us and those that are yet to come. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is totally enlightening, just to hear the personal, your own personal story about your children and how it affects them, which is the biggest, the hardest thing. Yeah, we know they're going to carry on your traditions and ceremonies and go forward. So thank you.
My husband had to just cringe because we would always hear a baby crying. We would always hear a baby crying, and he would just go, "Oh God, please no, not another one." We would hear an infant crying, and then we would have a dream, or we would go into ceremony, and a child would soon come. So, yeah.
Where you get 48 cups out of? Should I get that?
Yeah, that's what this is too.
We have
concentrate.
Someone needs to mute themselves.
I just want to say from the bottom of our hearts, speaking for everybody, we were all just glued to your voice, Becky. You taught us so much tonight, and it was just amazing. I can't thank you enough for being with us tonight.
Yeah.
I'd like to.
Well,
thank you for having me.
When I send out a summary, there were a few other questions. I'll send them to you, and I think you can answer them for me. Or do you want to do them now?
Okay. All right, I will.
Follow up or now?
If we have time, that's fine.
Okay, is that okay? Someone asked, what about voting? We're on the brink of trying to pass 2 bills for voting in the United States. How is the government suppressing votes on the reservations?
Well, what happened was we don't have, we're so rural that a number of our reservations, they don't have streets. They don't have street addresses. The majority of people get their mail at a post office box. And so they were prohibiting them from voting because they didn't have a mailing address. And so I know here in Montana, they were addressing that. They were trying to do everything they can in order to put that into place because, you know, they're way out in the middle of nowhere where they have to drive, you know, some people at Navajo, you have to drive an hour and a half in order to even get into some place with the store. And there's no street address that says 123, you know, over by the Mesa. And so they just didn't, they're trying to address that by, I know in Rosebud, what they did with us was they gave us an address, they gave us a street address that the post office had in place And so that's what we went by, but we got all of our mail at a post office box and stuff. But in order to have FedEx come, we needed to have a street address and stuff. So they're addressing those because they don't want to disenfranchise voters.
Yeah.
And that was one way of doing it.
Okay.
I have to mention one thing that I thought was so amazing for the Cherokee tribe, when they got their COVID shots, they got their COVID vaccinations, they vaccinated their Cherokee speakers first because there's only 2,000 of them left. And so they vaccinated their Cherokee speakers first so that they could make sure that their language stayed, that they could preserve their language. So I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah, that's nice.
You know.
And Bev Copeland.
Anyway, sorry.
No, excuse me for interrupting you. Bev Copeland sent a note to everyone. She encourages everyone to check the history of our own community to see if there are any mention of Native Americans in our local cities. In Morton Grove, their history museum noted that their history began with white settlers. And I think that's true all over. So, wow, thank you. I want to end up with, if I can find my, okay. I've got some slides to follow up about things that are coming up. I think that we're all still here shows how deeply you have affected us and reached us. So we truly appreciate this. And
question, please.
Somebody.
I wanted.
Wait, I'm having trouble here.
All right. May I ask a question of Becky, please?
Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead while I'm trying to figure out.
74 distinct tribes with varying populations, obviously, but an average of well under 10,000 per tribe. Is there any sort of a confederation so that the 4 million off reservation and the million still living on can have an impact?
I think one of the things that happens, which for me is kind of unfortunate, you see them pulling together for different things like for the presidential vote. You know, you saw tribes pull together. And I know in the state of Montana, we tried so hard in order to impact our government vote, and I mean, for our governor and for our senators and stuff, and we weren't successful. So we're getting a little bit better. I know they'll pull together for Deb Haaland to try and support her to make sure that that she gets confirmed. And so for things like that, we're getting better at pulling together. The one thing that you need to remember is those 574 tribes, each one of them has their own language, their own culture, their own identity. And so they don't see themselves, we don't see ourselves as one group of Native people. We just don't. We see ourselves as individual tribes. We see ourselves as unique. And so every tribe will say, we are the people, you know, we're the people, we're the original ones. And so we have to learn to work together as a group in order to have the impact that some of the other minority groups do. We struggle with that. And I can just be honest that we struggle with that. And that's historical.
Is there not aren't there some areas of common interest? The importance of mother, the importance of family. I mean, are the customs and traditions so very different? My God, it's worse than the 12 tribes of Israel. There were only 12, but.
Yeah. which actually was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because I saw some of the, in some respects, you know, some of the similarities. We are really different. Like the Blackfeet and the Crow, were very, very different in our language, in our customs. We're really different. We see ourselves as pretty unique, and all those histories where people will joke about, you know, we always joke about the Crow, and we'll say, well, they helped Custer, you know, and stuff, and so then they got the best land, and you know, and so, you know, we joke about that, but part of it is still has a little sense of seriousness about it. So I lived at Crow for a while, and I was driving in and working at Indian Health Service, but I wasn't aware that the Crow and the Northern Cheyenne were such bitter enemies, and they were. I mean, it's still current, and so in the government's wisdom, put the only hospital then on Crow that the Northern Cheyenne had to go to, and it caused a lot of problems, you know. So I mean, we're still struggling with kind of those basic issues, but we're pulling together on things that are extremely important to us, like land, like water, keeping our children, missing and murdered Indigenous women, addressing suicide, addressing meth use, addressing alcoholism. You know, those are things that are unique issues to all of us. So we're trying to work together to see what we can do to solve those in a productive way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am trying, for some reason, I can't get the screen to share. Let me just read you some things that are coming up. And I just read that Candy Goldstein was an exchange student at a Phoenix Indian school in the 70s, or by the 70s, boarding school was voluntary. Let me mention a few upcoming NCJW events. March 9th, a film and panel discussion about African-American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance. March 11th, JCAS discusses sex for pay, work or pray. March 17th, the Salon, Judaism, Jews, and Addiction. And March 22nd, another spotlight, tax infrastructure, calling it, it's not wonky, it's your money. It's worthwhile finding out about the taxes because it's your money. It's going to be a big issue, and from now until the 2022 election in Illinois. And NCJW gives back. We're supporting senior citizens in February, providing Shabbat gift bags to seniors at the self-help home. And we have lots more information on our website. Becky, again, this was absolutely wonderful. We're just so grateful to you. So,
and please,
thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Super.
And I'd like to remind everybody to call their senators and representatives and tell them to vote for Deb Havlin for Secretary of Interior. It's very important that we get our support. We'll send it out in the email to everybody too.
Yeah.
But so please do that. And again, Becky.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was an honor. Thank you.
You guys all take care and stay safe.
You too.
All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bev, you're still here, and I think this was great.
Thank you.
But it is a near impossible task when she describes the 574, each thinking where 10 minutes ago she said, we think of the we, not the me. And then she says, but there's 574 distinct we's.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the geography, that everyone is so spread out.
So isolated.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Who was the I missed the beginning. I apologize. Who was the connection to Becky?
Jan Schwartz, knew someone who I think was at the program, who knows her.
Oh,
who said,
you should stop the recording.
I thought I did. Thank you.
I always